One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. All right, our guest today on One Question is Iowa State Athletic Director Jamie Pollard, and we're going to start with an interesting look back at Jamie's time at Iowa State. And the question, Jamie, is I'm curious if you can compare the very first time you were introduced in Ames and maybe your perception of what athletic director leadership was 12 years ago when you became the AD, and compare it to today, how you think of the challenges, but also the benefits an athletic director can bring to student athletes, to his or her staff, and to a fan base. What are the differences, or maybe you're going to tell me things are very much the same as you perceived 12 years ago?
Well, great question, and a really deep question to make you reflect on a decade here. I think of a couple things that come to mind. First, more locally to being at one place for 10 years versus just a snapshot of what was it like 10 years ago being AD versus today. So on a local level for me, after I'll be starting my 12th year this year. I've kind of coined this phrase with our staff that from a leadership standpoint, we're well past all the low-hanging fruit. And we're really now into what I call transformational leadership change. And so what do I mean by that? Well, initially at a place like Iowa State, we were able to identify, here are the real tangible goals. We were underfunded, we were understaffed, and we were under-facilitated, if that's a word. And so there were very tangible goals that we had to go achieve. Now, they weren't easy to achieve, but they were very tangible. We need these facilities. We need to try to get the budget to here. We need to get staffing levels to here. And so now, as the leader at that same organization, well over a decade later, we can check the box. We're not underfunded. We are not understaffed, and we are, have greatly invested and improved our facilities. So now as a leader, you're called upon for what I call like transformational goals, the goals that are not as tangible. They're not things like as athletics director I can see and do as much as it is, making sure you had the exact right coaches and you've got the right student athletes, and are you doing everything humanly possible to help them achieve transformational results? Where before, a decade ago, yeah, you want to aspire to win championships, but you had to put those goals in realistic terms related to the resources you were providing. And now you're at a level of, we don't need to provide more resources. We don't need to provide better facilities. We don't need to provide more staffing to reach aspirational goals. So as a leader, what am I called upon to do? And, how am I to reach in and help that coach or help that student athlete achieve some really, outstanding accomplishments and goals? And that's a daunting task for a leader, because when I think back to 10 years ago, yeah, it was, it's tough. It's a challenging job, but you could, the goals were a little more black and white, and now they're kind of more softer, squishy, I guess, if that's the right way to describe it. And so I'm not saying I've struggled with that, but I've challenged us and challenged our staff, because it isn't as simple anymore to say, well, what are the goals for the next 10 years? Because I think as a leader, I've got to be able to find ways to, the more motivation, the more, how do you really clear the path to help these guys achieve what they want to achieve? As far as athletics director from 10 years ago to today, wow, it's, I would say night and day in terms of how fast things are happening around you. The old days 10 years ago of, having, whether it was 48 hours or 72 hours to have something kind of happen and unfold. I mean, it happens in 48 seconds or 72 seconds, not hours. And that's a real challenge, because you can find yourself you can be overreactionary because things are just coming at you too quickly, or coming at your constituents, or your president, or your boards, depending on where they're getting their information from, and a lot harder to guide and provide strong leadership because you feel like you can be microly attacked with a lot of inaccurate or presumptuous information that can make it really unhealthy and a lot more challenging. When I think of coaching searches, and I look at searches of hiring coaches as being the most important thing I do as athletics director, because the coach is who's going to be in direct contact with those student athletes. And the way you used to be able to approach it a decade ago, it was fast moving a decade ago. It's warp speed today because of just the way information is shared and how things can be so misleading and derail a search or derail a candidate before you even get the process started. And so that's probably been the biggest challenge to adapt to over that when I look at a point in time 10 years ago versus today.
So you've hit on a couple of really interesting points here. The first of which, you've mentioned head coaches in a couple of different capacities. But head coaches can so many times, as you referenced, since they are so engaged front line with student athletes, create a culture that their hires are just of the utmost importance in getting the right fit. Of course, that word we hear so much about. But how much time would you say in a given week you spend on thinking about how to instill the right culture in your department, across your department, and actually acting upon that plan?
Unfortunately, I think I probably do more of the acting on it than I'll probably give my credit for, but I don't feel like I get to do enough of the acting because you tend to get bogged down in a lot of the other pieces. And I think that's another challenge you get, when you're new AD versus where I am today, at 12 years. I described it to somebody today where I'd said, before we were really doing the heavy lifting and trying to push the train. Now the train's moving, but now you've got to make sure that the conductors are going in the directions you want. You're not, the train's moving pretty good because you've got a lot of really good staff around you, and it feels less on you. But so I spend a lot of time thinking about how to provide the best leadership. But that acting part is still, if it was simple, everybody'd be doing it, but how do you put it into action? Because again, you're talking about transformational changes, and you've really got to think that through. You've got to spend a lot of time thinking about it and trying to figure out how best to implement it. But I think that's part of one of the most important responsibilities of an athletics director, is making sure that we're never stop talking and thinking about what's the appropriate culture, and working to make sure that your actions are congruent with your words.
And that's today's One Question, brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996. One Question is designed to give D1 Ticker subscribers valuable insights on how executive leaders in college athletics think about key issues on their respective campuses, in their departments, or within their leagues and conferences. One Question is brought to you by Turnkey Search, a top industry search firm since 1996.